Listen carefully. This is the sound inmates at Corcoran say they never forget. A warning siren. A steel door slamming shut. A yard going deadly silent. On a scorching afternoon in the early 1990s, two men, rivals from birth, were walked into the same tiny exercise cage. They didn't speak. They didn't blink. But both knew exactly what was about to happen. A guard barked an order. Another guard raised a weapon. And in that instant, everyone watching felt the same cold tension. At Corcoran, moments like this could end in blood. Later, officials would call it necessary force. Survivors would call it something else. And the truth would take years before the world finally heard it. How did one California prison, a place meant to control violence, become the center of some of the most shocking allegations in state history? What really happened during the infamous Gladiator days? Why did whistleblowers risk everything to speak out? And why do former inmates say the past never truly left those walls? To understand how things reached this point, we need to go back to the beginning. Corcoran State Prison opened its gates in 1988, planted on the dry bed of what was once Tulare Lake. At first glance, it looked like every other maximum security facility California had built. Thick concrete walls, guard towers, endless fencing, and a promise to keep the most dangerous inmates under control. But from the beginning, there was something different about Corcoran. The prison was assigned some of the state's most volatile prisoners, gang leaders, high-risk offenders, and men who had already caused chaos in other institutions. Officers were told they were working in the pressure cooker of the California prison system. Every shift carried tension, and every yard release felt like a test of whether things would explode. By 1989, rumors inside the system began to spread. People said Corcoran wasn't just another prison. It was a place where fights happened more often, tempers flared quicker, and the atmosphere felt permanently on edge. Even staff admitted the environment felt like it was designed for conflict. And soon, the stories became more disturbing. Some inmates claimed rival gang members were being placed together in small exercise cages, areas so tight there was no way to avoid a confrontation. Officers said the practice was meant to break gang influence, but inmates described it very differently. They said it felt like someone wanted violence to happen. Year by year, Corcoran's reputation grew darker. Internal reports documented a long list of violent encounters. Shotgun blasts meant to stop fights ended up taking lives. Investigators began asking questions about how so many deadly yard incidents could happen in such a short span of time. Some prisoners survived those moments. Others didn't. And behind the walls, a quiet fear began to grow. Fear that the violence wasn't always unavoidable, that sometimes it might have been predictable. That fear would eventually push one man to step forward, risking his career and safety to expose what he believed was happening. But before he came forward, things inside Corcoran would reach a point no one could ignore. For years, the violence inside Corcoran was treated like routine business. Reports were filed, shootings were justified, and life inside the prison moved on as if nothing strange was happening. But one officer saw things he could no longer ignore. His name was Richard Caruso, a correctional officer who worked the yards where the most intense incidents took place. At first, he tried to convince himself that what he witnessed was normal, that the chaos was simply part of managing dangerous men. But over time, patterns began to stand out. Fights didn't always feel spontaneous. Sometimes it seemed like rival inmates were being placed together even when staff knew it would spark trouble. And when violence broke out, the response felt too quick, too forceful, and far too deadly. Caruso started keeping notes. He studied the logs, the reports, the timing of each incident. The more he wrote down, the harder it became to stay silent. He believed something was very wrong, and he feared that lives were being lost because of decisions made behind closed doors. Eventually, the weight became too much. Caruso took a step that almost no correctional officer ever takes. He gathered his evidence, made copies of documents, and contacted federal investigators. It was a move that would change his entire life. When word reached Corcoran that someone inside had gone to the authorities, tension spread fast. Officers whispered in hallways. Supervisors questioned loyalties. Some believed Caruso had betrayed the department. Others quietly supported him but were too afraid to speak up. The investigation that followed was massive. Federal agents dug into years of records, interviewed staff, and examined every detail of the prison's deadly incidents. Confidence inside the institution began to crack. Some officers worried they could lose their jobs. Others worried they could lose their freedom. But as the case grew, something unexpected happened. Despite the evidence Caruso provided, despite the stories from inmates, despite the sheer number of violent incidents, the officers who stood trial were eventually found not guilty. The verdict sent shock waves through the prison system. Caruso had put everything on the line, and now he was left standing alone. Some called him a hero. Others called him a traitor. But no one, not inside Corcoran, not in the state, could ignore the questions he raised. And just when the system thought the storm was over, another crisis appeared inside the prison. One that had nothing to do with guns or yard fights, but everything to do with survival. Something far more silent, and just as deadly, was about to come to light. Long after the gunshots faded and the investigation slowed, a quieter alarm began ringing inside Corcoran. It wasn't loud like a riot. It didn't echo through the yards. But inmates felt it every day, and some said it was even more dangerous than the violence. It began with small complaints, headaches that wouldn't go away, prescriptions that were never refilled, sick call slips that disappeared instead of being answered. At first, no one outside the prison noticed. But inside, inmates said the medical system felt broken. Some claimed their conditions were ignored for weeks. Others said they waited months, even years, for basic treatment. A few described collapsing on the floor before anyone finally took them seriously. One former inmate said the moment he realized how serious things were was when he saw a man with chest pains begging staff for help. Instead of being rushed to medical care, the man was told to wait until the nurse gets around to it. When the nurse finally arrived, it was too late. Moments like that weren't rare. Inmates claimed they were becoming the new normal. Investigators later reviewed the prison's records and found troubling signs. Missing medications, delayed appointments, incomplete treatments. Even the prison's own medical spaces were criticized for poor conditions, from unsanitary equipment to practices that put already fragile inmates at even greater risk. People on the outside rarely heard these stories. They didn't make headlines the way the shootings did. But for prisoners living inside Corcoran, medical neglect wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a slow, constant fear, the fear that a simple illness could turn into something deadly if help didn't arrive in time. As voices grew louder, lawsuits followed. Families of inmates spoke out. Advocacy groups demanded change. Reports exposed new details about how deep the problems ran. And while the legal battles played out, conditions in certain parts of the prison continued to raise questions. Especially one part of Corcoran that would soon become the center of its most disturbing controversy yet. A place every inmate had to walk through at least once a day. The dining hall. Because soon, even the food itself would become part of the nightmare. For most inmates, the dining hall is supposed to be the one predictable part of the day. A routine. A break. A moment where hunger is the only thing on their mind. But at Corcoran, even that routine was shaken. It started with complaints that sounded too strange to be true. Inmates reported seeing mice in corners of the dining area. Others claimed food trays were served under leaking ceilings. A few said insects were found near storage spaces. At first, the stories sounded like exaggerations, the kind of thing prisoners say when they want attention. But then a lawsuit surfaced, and suddenly the rumors weren't rumors anymore. In filings presented to the court, inmates described an environment where pests and leaks were part of daily life. They said maggots fell from damaged ceiling areas. They said mice moved through the kitchen at night. They said their food didn't feel safe, not because of what was cooked, but because of what surrounded it. These details shocked people on the outside. But for inmates inside Corcoran, it felt like just one more sign that something deeper was wrong. They were already struggling with violence. Then medical care became a battle. And now, even the dining hall, the simplest place, the most basic part of survival, felt like another problem no one wanted to fix. Some prisoners began skipping meals if they could. Others ate quietly, hoping their tray wasn't one of the unlucky ones. And many wondered how conditions could get this bad without someone stepping in earlier. Advocates demanded answers. Why were basic health standards slipping? Why were maintenance issues allowed to continue? And most importantly, who was responsible for making sure inmates were treated with basic human dignity? As those questions spread outside the walls, something else stirred inside them. Tension, frustration, and a growing belief that the system had allowed too many problems to pile up for too long. And then, just when it seemed the worst of Corcoran's issues had been exposed, a new wave of attention arrived, one that reached far beyond the dining hall, medical rooms, or even the deadly yards. This time, it wasn't about what inmates were eating, but what they were living with every single day. A new investigation was coming, one that would peel back everything the public thought they knew about Corcoran. And it would spark the toughest question yet. If so many problems had been uncovered, how many more remained hidden? The problems at Corcoran didn't disappear after the whistleblower and the lawsuits. Instead, investigations revealed deeper, more systemic issues that affected every part of prison life. Medical care remained a major concern. Inmates reported delayed treatment, missing medications, and conditions that sometimes became life-threatening. Complaints about hygiene and sanitation persisted, creating an environment where illness and injury were constant threats. Even the dining hall, once a place of routine and safety, became another symbol of neglect. Inmates described ceilings that leaked, food areas infested with pests, and trays that weren't always safe to eat from. These conditions made prisoners realize that daily survival in Corcoran wasn't just about avoiding violence. It was about enduring a system that often failed to protect them. Meanwhile, new allegations of staff misconduct emerged. Reports of guards bending rules, allowing dangerous situations to escalate, or ignoring inmate safety highlighted ongoing weaknesses in oversight. The prison system's attempts to monitor and discipline staff often seemed inadequate, leaving many prisoners and families frustrated and fearful. By the mid-2020s, Corcoran had implemented stricter controls to manage rising violence, including limiting inmate movement and adjusting daily routines. But these measures often felt like temporary solutions rather than long-term fixes. Corcoran's history of violence, neglect, and scandal continues to shape the experience of everyone inside. And for those observing from the outside, the most pressing question remains: can a prison with such a troubled past ever truly reform? The answers are still uncertain, but what's clear is that the legacy of Corcoran is far from over. Inside Corcoran, the numbers and reports only tell part of the story. The real picture emerges when you hear from the people who lived through it every day. Some inmates speak of fear that never leaves them. One man recalled the constant tension in the yards, where rival gangs were sometimes placed together under minimal supervision. "You never knew if you'd make it back to your cell in one piece," he said. Every step outside felt like a gamble. Others described the psychological strain of daily life. Lockdowns, the loud alarms, the constant watch of guards, and the uncertainty of when violence could erupt created a pressure that never fully subsided. In some cells, men spent hours staring at the walls, trying to keep their minds from spinning. Sleep was scarce, trust was rare, and every day carried the weight of survival. Medical neglect added another layer of anxiety. One inmate shared that he watched friends suffer through untreated conditions, infections, chronic illnesses, injuries, while requests for care went unanswered. "You had to fight for even the smallest thing," he said. And sometimes fighting didn't mean arguing, it meant surviving. Even the simple routines of life, like eating meals, were fraught with discomfort and danger. Reports of leaking ceilings, pests, and food contamination meant that even nourishment could become a risk. For many, the daily act of eating was accompanied by worry and vigilance. Yet amid all the fear and hardship, there were moments of resilience. Inmates helped each other, shared small acts of kindness, and developed systems to survive both the chaos of the yard and the neglect in the facilities. Bonds were formed, lessons were learned, and strategies to navigate the prison's dangers became a matter of life and death. These stories show that life inside Corcoran was not just about crime or punishment. It was about constant negotiation with fear, uncertainty, and the limits of the system itself. And just when some inmates thought they could adapt, another crisis would appear, an event that reminded everyone that in Corcoran, nothing is ever truly safe. Even those who thought they had learned to survive in Corcoran knew that no routine could fully protect them. One afternoon, a yard fight erupted that quickly spiraled out of control. What began as a heated argument between two rival groups of inmates turned deadly in minutes. Officers scrambled to respond, but the chaos was overwhelming. Reinforcements rushed in as tensions exploded, and what should have been a controlled intervention became a scene of panic. Inmates were pushed, tripped, and forced to the ground. Some were injured, while others barely escaped serious harm. Witnesses later described the fear as suffocating. Even those who weren't directly involved felt it, knowing that at any moment, a wrong step could put them in danger. For hours, the yard was a scene of shouted commands, running footsteps, and an undercurrent of terror that left everyone shaken. This incident was a stark reminder that Corcoran's history of violence was not just in the past. Despite investigations, lawsuits, and reforms, the same dynamics that had haunted the prison for decades were still present. Inmates, staff, and administrators were trapped in a system where control and chaos existed side by side. Survivors of the fight later spoke about the long-lasting impact. Some carried physical injuries, while others carried the memory of fear. Many said it reinforced a hard truth. In Corcoran, no one was truly safe, and no system of rules could completely prevent the next outbreak of violence. And just as the prison tried to recover from this latest crisis, another shadow emerged, one that exposed not just the danger of the yard, but the hidden failures of the institution itself. After the yard fight, tension didn't just remain among the inmates. The ripple effects moved through the entire prison system. Investigators, lawyers, and advocacy groups began asking hard questions. How could such an outbreak happen? Why were so many injuries reported? And why did the response feel chaotic rather than controlled? Inside Corcoran, the answers weren't simple. Officers said they were overwhelmed. Supervisors admitted protocols were sometimes ignored. Medical staff struggled with shortages, and maintenance crews couldn't keep up with decades of wear and tear. The very system designed to maintain order seemed to be failing at multiple levels. Whistleblowers and former staff revealed more troubling details. Some officers reportedly turned a blind eye to small violations, believing that allowing minor chaos might prevent larger incidents. Others allegedly engaged in favoritism, providing certain inmates with privileges while denying others basic rights. Meanwhile, medical neglect persisted, with reports of untreated illnesses, delayed procedures, and ignored complaints. Inmates described feeling trapped in a loop. Violence erupted. The system responded too slowly or inconsistently, and then life returned to a tense calm until the next crisis. Every day was a test of patience, endurance, and survival. The corruption and systemic failures were not abstract problems. They had real consequences. Lives were affected, trust was broken, and the psychological toll on both inmates and staff was undeniable. Yet even as the system faltered, small acts of resistance began to emerge. Some inmates found ways to protect each other, reporting abuses when possible. Certain staff members quietly documented violations, hoping to create evidence for future reforms. And advocacy groups outside the prison amplified the voices of those who had been silenced for years. But for everyone inside Corcoran, the central question remained. Could the prison ever be a place of safety and rehabilitation, or was it destined to repeat the same patterns of violence and neglect? As these questions loomed, the stage was set for the next dramatic event, one that would shock both inmates and officials alike, and remind everyone that in Corcoran, history never truly stays buried. It was an ordinary morning at Corcoran, at least on the surface. Inmates were in their cells. Officers were on routine patrols, and the prison hummed with the same uneasy rhythm that had defined it for decades. Then, without warning, a single altercation in one housing unit set off a chain reaction. What started as a verbal argument between two inmates quickly escalated into a full-scale riot in that wing. Doors were locked, alarms blared, and officers struggled to contain the chaos. Within minutes, several rival groups were clashing. Fists, improvised weapons, and sheer panic turned hallways into battle zones. Guards rushed in, but the tight corridors and high tension made it nearly impossible to separate the combatants. As the chaos unfolded, another problem emerged. Inmates trapped in nearby areas began witnessing the violence, spreading fear and confusion throughout the facility. Calls for medical attention and reinforcement were delayed. Injuries mounted, and once again, the cracks in the system became painfully clear. Witnesses later said that in those moments, the prison felt like it had no control at all. Some inmates tried to protect weaker prisoners. Others sought cover in corners, waiting for the danger to pass. Staff moved with caution, but even experienced officers admitted they were overwhelmed. The aftermath was grim. Multiple inmates were hospitalized, cells were damaged, and the entire wing remained on lockdown for days. The incident forced administrators and investigators to confront uncomfortable truths. Corcoran's combination of overcrowding, insufficient oversight, and deep-rooted tension made it a powder keg, and it could explode at any time. Yet, even amid the destruction, small acts of humanity emerged. Some prisoners helped fellow inmates to safety. Certain officers risked personal danger to prevent further injuries. And for a brief moment, the chaos revealed the resilience and courage that often went unseen behind the walls. But just when the dust settled, questions lingered. Who was truly responsible for the riot? Could the systemic failures that allowed it to happen ever be fully addressed? And, most importantly, what would happen the next time tension reached its breaking point? The story of Corcoran is far from over, and the prison's walls continue to hide secrets that the public may never fully understand. After the riot, Corcoran was forced to face its past and its present. Investigations were launched. Lawsuits piled up. Changes were promised, from stricter protocols to improved medical care. Some reforms took hold, but many critics argued they only scratched the surface. For inmates, life continued with the same tension and uncertainty. Guards still walked the tiers with caution. Medical care improved slightly, but delays and neglect remained a part of daily life. And the shadow of past violence never fully disappeared. Corcoran's history is a lesson in extremes. Extreme violence, extreme neglect, and extreme resilience. It shows what happens when power is concentrated behind walls, when oversight fails, and when fear becomes a daily companion. Yet it also reveals small sparks of hope. Prisoners looking out for one another, staff willing to stand up, and whistleblowers exposing truths that would otherwise remain hidden. The story of Corcoran State Prison isn't just about one riot, one scandal, or one whistleblower. It's about a system that continues to wrestle with its own contradictions, a place where danger and humanity exist side by side, where survival is never guaranteed, and where the past continues to shape every day. Even now, the walls hold stories that have never been told. The question remains, will Corcoran ever truly change, or will its legacy of controversy and struggle continue for another generation? If you thought this was shocking, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. We want to hear what you think about life inside Corcoran. Share this video with friends who need to know the truth about what really happens behind prison walls. And remember, this is only the beginning. There are more untold stories, more hidden truths, and more secrets waiting inside America's most controversial prisons. Stay tuned, because the story is far from over.